right, good stuff, lads. Well, let us move on to the Los Angeles Rams as we continue our NFC West preview and look ahead to the 2024-2025 season, early and all as we are ahead of the September kickoff. Kieran, I might start with you this time on the Rams. Like last year, very much a surprise package and probably underlined in a big way Sean McVay's coaching credentials. Not a team that anybody was expecting to make the playoffs, people talking about transition, rebuild and so on, but it wasn't. They were able to build on a fly and plugged in some really nice pieces, not least, of course, Puka Nacua, who's one of the outstanding finds of the draft. And they've got, momentum now. They're not a surprise package anymore, but I suppose for me, and I don't know whether you concur or not, it's all around whether you still have enough in the tank for Matthew Stafford. And it's interesting that they've made investments along the O-line to try and make sure that they get every little last bit of drop of magic out of him that they can. But we've seen this time and time again, right? For everybody except Tom Brady, one year they're at their prime and the next year they're on the way down the hill and you're in a Drew Brees style situation or a Matt Ryan style situation where it's just not there anymore.
Yeah. I remember talking with Brian late last season. We all know that the Rams started off 3-6, got to the break, and then they started scrapping out wins, and they ended up winning 7 of their 8 games. And we would talk, and it was the question: are they going to get over the line? And I was like, I don't know. It's they ended up getting there with a 10-7 record. But obviously, the main question with the Rams is how are they going to cope with the loss of Aaron Donald. Now, the good news for the Rams is they drafted 2 incredible players from the Florida State Seminoles. Quick plug for the game in August in Braden Fisk and Jared Verse. Together, I think they can plug that hole because we all know that's a huge hole to fill, and Donald was a massive part of what the Rams were. If they didn't draft those 2 guys, I would be questioning, their kind of validity in the league. But I think they're going to stick around, a good amount towards December. I don't think they have enough in the tank to challenge the Niners in the business end of the season. But they drafted very well, which is something they haven't done in a long time. They've opted for the high price free agents. I think they're going to make the playoffs. Just to jump ahead, I like them to make the playoffs from the NFC West. Losing Raheem Morris to Atlanta will definitely impact them, but I think picking up Verse and Fisk on top of the standout season we had from Puka and Stafford just squeezing every ounce out of those 36-year-old legs and arms. Interesting season coming ahead for the Rams. The O-line is very good. Very, very sturdy. I like what they've done there. The defense, they've bolstered up a lot, and I think it's going to be another similar season to last year. I like them 9-8 this coming year.
Brian, Kieran mentioned it there. They made one particularly big free agency signing at Jonah Jackson from the Lions, which is the kind of centerpiece or the star attraction in terms of protecting Stafford. They also brought in Tre'Davious White, another high price free agent as a cornerback. A player we didn't mention a huge amount during the season last season, but all things considered, Kobe Turner was an absolute find for them. Puka Nacua tended to get a lot of the headlines being the offensive juggernaut that he was. But how do you see the Rams going this year? Bearing in mind, as we said, they're not lying in the long grass anymore. They're not a surprise package. Everybody's expecting them to be good, and that can go another way as well.
Yeah, they strike me as a bit of a New York Giants scenario last year, having had the season, kind of a surprise season factor that went with last year, where there wasn't a lot expected of. A lot of rookies were expected to step up. You would argue that, with the exception of that marquee free agent signing on the offensive line, they're essentially running it back in terms of this offense. And sometimes it's a dangerous thing in terms of whether these guys are going to really produce in the next year. I mean, the Puka's a fantastic talent, and I imagine teams will be finding ways to navigate against him this year, as opposed to the element of surprise last year. I thought Kupp kind of tailed off towards the end of the season. But ultimately, it's about Matthew Stafford. Like, I have great respect for Matthew Stafford in terms of people last year doubting him, and even the year after they won the Super Bowl, there was the injury blow, and it was early on in the season. People were suggesting that operation was more serious than it was, and that was the case. He didn't really got going that year, and he came back last year, and again, you could argue he fully delivered. It's a huge year in the sense of Sean McVay has been re-energized last year. It'll be interesting where his head's at this year going in, and whether the guys ultimately can give the same production that they were getting from Aaron Donald. I'm not entirely sure. I'm actually going to go. I'm going to go I think it's way too early to be putting our picks in, but I'm opposed to Kieran on this. I think we'll see a slight tailback, and maybe they'll be in thereabouts for the playoffs. But I think it might be one of the teams that every year we have these 3 or 4 teams that made it that didn't come back the following year. I think the Rams are in that category for me.
Interesting. Shane, if for whatever reason Matthew Stafford goes down, we might have the interesting side of Jimmy Garoppolo stepping in as quarterback in his old division, of course, where he was with the 49ers. And we hope that's not the case. Obviously, you want Stafford to remain healthy because, as we've all been saying, the Rams go how he goes, but they also go how Sean McVay coaches. I mean, I think a lot of people even added to their store of respect for him. He is, after all, a Super Bowl winning coach, so it's not like he's undervalued in the NFL. But as Kieran mentioned, when they're sitting at 3-6 and everybody's looking at them going, yeah, this is exactly what we expected, and yet they're able to go away and figure it out. That's something that they've consistently done, which makes them dangerous.
Not only does it make them dangerous, but if you look at their schedule, they have the first half of their year, they have a relatively easy run of it. Between the start of the season and Thanksgiving, the only difficult games they have are against the Lions in the opening week and at home to the 49ers. And I think there's a home game against the Dolphins thrown in there. There's a whole series of games until Thanksgiving that are very winnable. And we've seen the last couple of seasons, even when they were on that down year immediately after winning the Super Bowl, the Rams build into a year. They're a bit of a slow burner. They don't hit out straight away. So if they have their more difficult games at the tail end of the year, that suits them just fine. I think in the last stretch of the year, they have to play against the Eagles, Bills, 49ers, and then there are 2 other divisional rivals in a pretty tight space of time. And if Matthew Stafford stays fit, and if the defense manages to pull together by that time of the season, they can be pretty strong heading into this. And I think they have a better chance of making the playoffs than they did this time last year based on that. There are only 3 things, there are 3 things, that could really undo the Rams from the beginning. If Matthew Stafford gets hurt, I don't believe Jimmy Garoppolo has the talent, skill, or humility to properly take up that offense and bring it in a way which can still be competitive in the tail end of the year. And that's even with Sean McVay coaching, who I regard very highly. I regard the organization of the Rams very highly in terms of how they draft and how they coach, particularly in the offensive side of the ball. But if Stafford's gone, that is a big concern for me. Secondly is just the way personnel on defense. Losing Aaron Donald is obviously huge, not only because of the impact he makes on the field, but imagine the impact he makes in the locker room, in training camp, getting the young guys to get in line, keeping them hard, keeping them honest. And not having him there is going to be a big problem. And then the third thing is, of course, Raheem Morris, the defensive coordinator, isn't in Los Angeles anymore. He's gone off to be the head coach in Atlanta. And I know the guy who's now the new defensive coordinator, Chris Shula, was a linebackers coach. He's somebody who's been in the building. He knows the culture. It will take him a bit of time to find his feet. So, look, it all depends really, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, how well they really build into the season. But if you're going to trust any team to do it, it's going to be the Rams. The big thing is keeping Matthew Stafford healthy, because those early block of games, those first 10 or 11 weeks, there are easily 7 or 8 wins in there before we even get after Thanksgiving. They just need to find their feet pretty early and trust in the offensive talent that they have.
Yeah, I'm going to say to throw in my 2 cents. I mean, you've covered a lot of the points there, Shane, and indeed, Brian and Kieran have also. I'm probably just summarising what others have said, but I think it's a case of, are we going to see diminishing marginal returns from Stafford? If, as you say, Shane, he goes down, I have no confidence in Garoppolo necessarily being the guy to lead this team. I do have huge faith in McVay, and I think, as you alluded to there, Shane, I think even if you go back to their Super Bowl season, they're not a team that goes into a tailspin or panics when they lose a couple of games. I mean, famously, they didn't win a single game, and was it November or December? They went a whole month without winning a game in their Super Bowl season, at a time in the season where you're like, man, you really need to be going well here if you got any ambitions in the postseason. And that actually didn't affect them at all. I think that was hugely impressive, and what they did last year, as you called out, Kieran, and turning it around from 3-6 was hugely impressive. Even in addition to the draft, to the players that you called out, I think Blake Corum, the Michigan running back, is another intriguing one. I'm interested to see how McVay uses him in the offense. He's been one of those sleepers that you thought, if he falls to the right coach, if he falls into the right system, something kind of magical could happen there. You know, we know they've got Kyron Williams, and he was a standout for them last year before getting injured. They have a lot of really interesting pieces there, and I think it's going to be fun to watch. I think personally, I would still have them finishing second in the division. I have to say, I know, Brian, you're looking out for who this year's New York Giants are. I'm not necessarily sure it's going to be them. I think you also have to look at what's around them, and no spoilers here. We'll talk about the Seahawks and the Cardinals as part of our previews as well. But I still think it's going to be as you were. In fact, I wonder if that's the way it's going to be for the division as a whole.
Connor, can I just throw a quick one in there? CJ Stroud has been transitioning very well into the podcast world. I don't know if anybody's seen his comments as we record this evening. Earlier this week, he said that if Matthew Stafford had been in Green Bay during the period in which Aaron Rodgers was there, he would have won 2 more Super Bowls, as opposed to Aaron Rodgers walking away with no more apart from the one he had. He thinks he's far and above a better quarterback than Aaron Rodgers ever was in the league. So CJ Stroud showing some nuggets out there. So I think we're interesting plots already for next season, if we do ever have a Rodgers versus Stafford game, and even CJ Stroud showing himself into the mix against these guys. It's already warming up for the big season ahead.
I think the kids call it catch and strays.
I think the Texans play the Jets in prime time as well, if not in prime time in one of the big games. So that'll be great. I can't wait till Aaron Rodgers gets on Pat McAfee and has a swipe back at him. But
we haven't even mentioned Matthew Stafford's wife, who has her own podcast and who's inclined to throw in grenades and add to the entertainment value as well. Like Matthew Stafford's wife versus CJ Stroud, that could be a nice little podcast off. That could very well keep us entertained through the dark, bright days. They're the brightest days of the year, but they're the dark days for the NFL fans while we wait for the curtain to raise on the new season.